Welcome to the Long Thread podcast about spinning, stitching, and weaving by hand. The podcast is presented by Long Thread Media, publishers of Spin-Off, Handwoven, Piecework, and Little Looms magazines. Find us online at longthreadmedia.com. Trinway Silks is where weavers, spinners, knitters, and stitchers find the silk they love. Select from the largest variety of silk spinning fibers, silk yarn, and silk threads and ribbons at trinwaysilks.com. You'll discover a rainbow of colors thoughtfully hand-dyed in Colorado. Love natural? Trinway's array of wild silks provide choices beyond white. If you love silk, you'll love Trinway Silks, where superior quality and customer service are guaranteed. I'm your host, Long Thread Media co-founder Ann Merrow. Chick Colony started Harrisville Designs in 1971 in the historic village of Harrisville, New Hampshire. Since long before then, the village has had a long history of textiles and the Colony family. We sat down in the weaving classroom above the shop in one of the historic mill buildings. So, Chick, thanks so much for sitting down with me.
That's all right.
So, you go by Chick, but your name is John Colony, right?
Right.
Yeah. And it's so appropriate that here we are in the historic village of Harrisville at Harrisville Designs, and it's so deeply connected with your work. Can you tell me a little bit about the building and the village and where we're sitting?
Yeah, Harrisville is considered the best preserved early textile village in the country. And it's not famous because it was unique. It's famous that it's still here. Mm-hmm. Only one building has really been built since the Civil War. And the mill that was here that sustained the life of the village for a long time closed in 1970. It was a company that my own family started in 1850, and they ran until 1970. And I was in the military when my father and his brother were closing the business. And the town pretty much depended on the mill. Nobody came to Harrisville unless they had a reason to be here. People were very self-contained. Many people who lived here didn't have cars because they didn't have to go anywhere. And a little industrial village is like a miniature city. You can walk to the store, you can walk to the school, you can walk to work, you can walk to recreate. And it was pretty self-contained. Growing up here, my father was the first one in the family to move here from Keene, which is 10 miles to the west, because the family moved back to Keene. They came from Keene, bought a mill here from the Harris family, and ran it. And then right after the Civil War, they moved back to Keene. And my father was the first one in that family to move back here. So I consider, having grown up in Harrisville, he considered growing up in Keene. So after the mill closed, it was a question of what's going to happen next. And it wasn't a matter of just selling the woolen mill to some other woolen mill operator, because 53 mills in New England closed in 1970. And this was just one of them. So it was clear that the town was going to change. Many people who lived here thought, well, the mill will open again because it always had, but it really wasn't going to do that. And I got interested in working on what the future of the town was going to be. And I had been living in New Orleans before I came here because I was in the military. I was in the Coast Guard and lived in the French Quarter of New Orleans for 3 years. And I noticed a lot of beautiful old buildings down there, and they were tearing them down to build hotels so people could come and look at the beautiful old buildings that they had just torn down. And it just seemed crazy to me. And so I sort of built some consciousness of what preservation issues were all about. That was the time of urban removal, too, and they were really tearing a lot of things down. Mm-hmm. So I came back, interested, and a lot of local people, friends of my parents and friends of Harrisville, got together and struggled with what we would do, what would happen to the town. Right in the middle of this effort, the mill was sold to a company that didn't do textiles. So it was clear we were preserving a textile village in which there probably wouldn't be any more textiles. And I thought, well, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm not going to go back in the military. The family business is gone. Maybe I'll start a woolen mill. You can imagine how my father thought about that. But I didn't know what else I was going to do. And the idea of the business was to sustain textiles here so that the town had always been a textile village. It would continue to be somewhat of a textile village. And that's where Harrisville Designs came from. And I got into it backwards. I didn't have any intention of going into a business. I didn't know what the future of the family business was going to be like. But it gave me a reason to have a business, not just to make money. I mean, that seemed crazy to me. So the business and the preservation effort have always been very closely related and still are.
And I'm really excited to talk about the wool and the looms and all that, but I just want to pause for a moment and ask you a bit about, we talk about preservation, but conservation has been an important element, right? I mean, water was crucial to this area.
Yeah, it is. It is tricky, conservation in general, because in the 1980s, New Hampshire started to grow quite a bit, and nobody knew what was going to happen. And the essence of Harrisville, it's a small village surrounded by big woods. And so protecting those woods is important, and we've spent quite a bit of time on that conservation side of it too. And when the National Historic Landmark was laid out, the person choosing the borders for the National Historic Landmark said, what are we going to do about the water? It's so critical to what's here. But there are a lot of summer camps and cottages built on the reservoirs. And he came up with the idea of including the reservoirs themselves up to the high water mark, but not the cottages, which weren't historic, in the National Historic Landmark. So the ponds and reservoirs are actually part of the National Historic Landmark.
And I mean, the water, like this is a mill town on a mill pond in a way, right? Because the water would have been part of the manufacturing.
That's right. That's why it's here. The water drops 100 feet from the one side of this mill to the other side. And, it's like water going down the stairs. You use it where you can.
Right, yeah.
And it comes from the sky. There's no river coming in here. It's all just what we get from the sky. So this year has been very dry, for instance. But normally, the water evaporates from the Atlantic Ocean, comes over in the form of clouds, rains in the reservoirs, comes through Harrisville, and goes back to the Atlantic Ocean, like a perpetual motion machine, really.
So you went from being a mill that made finished textiles to being a mill that made yarn.
That's right. When I started Harrisville Designs, I knew we were going to be tiny compared to what was here before. It was a medium-sized textile mill, about 125 employees, 7 sets of cards, which is how they measured woolen mills. And I thought, well, everybody told me you couldn't make yarn on a small scale. And I knew you could. It was very difficult to make cloth on a small scale because you have to have not only just weaving, but lots of finishing and everything else. And so I decided I would go back and just make the yarn. And there was a weaver here living in town, and I went to talk to her about where she got her yarn. And I wanted to make something that could be identifiable as coming from here. And the old textiles, when I got to New York, it had to be just like everybody else's. So she told me that she bought, when she could, and she said the best weaving yarns in the world are coming from Sweden, Scandinavia. And I thought, aren't any sheep over there? That's funny.
Right.
But there are weavers there. They created a market for better quality yarns than the industry was producing. So I thought, well, that would be a good idea. We could do that. So that's what we started out to do.
And it mostly started off as products for weavers?
Yes. And then because our colors were so dramatic and successful, many people wanted to knit with our yarns. Mm-hmm. And it's really hard to make a yarn that works perfectly for knitting and perfectly for weaving. It has to be strong enough to weave, but it has to be subtle enough,
right.
So it has to drape.
Yeah.
So, we've tried to do both. I mean, basically the only change was we introduced some Australian wool into the New Zealand wool we were using to give it a softer hand. And it's worked reasonably well, I think. It's not the best yarn for knitters, it's not the best yarn for weavers, but it does work for both.
Well, I think maybe it's not the best yarn for all knitting or all weaving, but it is definitely the best yarn for some knitting and some weaving.
No, that's true, for sure. I think it is.
Yeah. And part of that is because it's a woolen-spun yarn. Can you tell me a little bit about that and what makes Harrisville yarns kind of unique that way?
2 things. When I started out, I looked at these Scandinavian yarns that were available, and they were all yarn dyed. So if you picked a yarn, you could look at 300 colors and choose from it. But they had a certain look because they were all solid, plain yarn-dyed yarns. And I thought, well, I don't want to do that, so we'll make heather yarns where we dye the wool first, then mix the colors. And luckily, we got connected with Nels Nemorowski, who volunteered to help us with the color choices, and she became our color designer. And we basically developed 12 or 13 solid colors, and from those base colors, we make our blends. And those base colors pretty much haven't changed since 1973 or 4.
They're great colors.
Yeah,
They're
they
kind
are
of
good.
bold and they have a good range and they go well together.
Yeah, the nice thing about it, they're all made from the same solid colors. So every time we use orange, it's the same orange. So it matches very well with every time we use the same red. And it's been good.
But the difference between what, like if you opened up a bale of your dyed wool, people might be surprised that that's what turns into the other colors, the way the blending and the heathering works.
Yeah, it is true. And it's also drove us to the kind of wool we ultimately use, because what we found out is when you mix colors of wool, it's like mixing colors of paint. They get darker and darker. So if you want to have a nice looking teal made from navy and green, you better have a bright green and a bright navy, or else you're going to have a really dark teal. So if you take a traditional dark navy and a traditional forest green and mix them together, it's not workable. So we had to dye very bright colors, and you can't dye wool brighter than it is.
Oh, that makes sense.
I mean, for instance, you can't dye brown wool pink.
Right.
So the basic wool we settled on was, it also had to be a wool that we could get year in and year out. The price will change, but the wool's available. And we ended up on a New Zealand lamb's wool that's very white. And it's also the wool that was used to make tennis balls at the time for the same reason. It has to be bright white to make bright green.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And it's been a great wool for us.
Mm-hmm. Wow. But it takes a particular kind of equipment to mill short lamb's wool lengths, right? Can you tell me about the woolen, what makes the yarn different?
Yeah, there are two ways to make yarn from wool. One is the worsted system, and one is, for confusion's sake, called the woolen system. Basically, it's combing versus carding. So woolen systems are carded, worsted systems are combed. And a carded system is it's a perfect system for making a blended color. It's hard to blend worsted yarns successfully, but and some fibers have never been combed successfully. I think cashmere, for instance, is almost always a carded yarn. But the tradition here was for carded wool, and that's the kind of equipment we have, and that's what we do.
That's one thing I was curious about. You said that you sort of scaled down from being a fabric mill to yarn. Were you using the same equipment?
Well, we are. The thing is, the equipment, if you want to get small, the equipment doesn't get small. You just have less of it.
Yeah.
And when I decided to set up the business, my father said to me, "How are you going to do that? You don't have any money to buy any equipment." And I said, "Well, I'm going to buy your equipment, and I'm going to give you stock in the company." And he said, "This stock is worthless." Oh. And I said, "You're right. And so's the equipment." And he said, "You're right." So I was able to start a manufacturing company with just some paper.
I don't know. You may not have had a business background, but that sounds to me.
I remember a little from business school, yeah. But my father was, at first he thought I was crazy because he'd been through it his whole life. But he was very supportive, and that made life a lot easier for me. He knew how to buy wool, for instance, and I didn't.
Yeah.
And he was a big help for that kind of thing. And he was only 55. So he worked for 20 years with Harrisville Designs. He was the inventor in the business, actually.
Okay. There must have been kind of a groundswell. Were people really supportive that you were trying a new way of doing this?
Yeah, locally they were, and the weaving world was. I mean, weaving in the 1970s was coming on strong. It was Back to the Earth, Whole Earth Catalog, a lot of those things, and people wanted to do their own thing. So it was supportive. And in fact, that's when we came up with the idea of making the looms, because the looms that were available then were expensive and were holding people back. And as soon as I wove on a table loom, I decided, well, that's no good. I don't like that. We need to get a good, inexpensive floor loom. So then I remembered from business school the razor and razor blades kind of thing. And I figured, well, if we're making the blades, we better make the razors. And when I really started designing a loom with my father, actually, I found out they're expensive to make. That's why they cost a lot to buy.
Right.
And I almost gave up. And then I came up with the idea of selling them as kits. So the person buying them would do a lot of the work on them themselves,
right,
which saves money and saves shipping, and also empowered people to understand how this tool was going to work because they built it. And it was very successful as a kit. And the purpose of it was really to keep people off table looms. I mean, I just like the rhythm of weaving. If you're not using your feet, you still got the table to worry about.
Right.
But I just didn't find it relaxing to weave on a table loom.
I think there's something about that sort of whole body left and right,
Well, we all like different things from weaving. That's particularly what I like. My wife, Pat, is a designer. She likes to design something. She can weave an inch and walk away. And I don't care what I'm weaving as long as I'm weaving fast.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah. And correct me if I'm wrong, they're particularly well known for rug weaving. Is that right?
Not necessarily. The rug loom is.
The rug loom,
because
okay.
I designed later on in 1988, I got the idea that we needed to make a statement about the kind of company we were. We always thought of our looms like the Volkswagen of looms. They're light and inexpensive, but they get you there. But I wanted to say, we could make another kind of loom too. And I looked around and I thought maybe a good small rug loom would be a good idea. And that's when I got in touch with Peter Collingwood and asked him if he would be interested in designing a loom with us. And he said he was, lucky for me. So that's where the rug loom came from.
There's something about weaving rugs, I think, that just really entrances people. And it seems kind of funny in a way. I want to spend a lot of work on something I'm going to put down on the ground, but the scale and the graphic and the power of it, I think there's just something really special about weaving rugs. Yeah,
people like it. And I found I liked it more than I thought. As I said, I like to weave fast, and I didn't think I could weave fast on a rug loom. But, I mean, I could weave about a foot in an hour. And that's not so bad. I mean, it moves along. It's very physical. I mean, the difference between a sweater and a rug is when you put a sweater on the ground and walk on it, you're going to wear holes in it right away. It's really the density of the cloth that makes the difference, not necessarily the yarn. And the rug loom builds up the density of the cloth.
Did you and your wife start out as weavers, or was it something that you came to because of the whole business?
No, I had never woven. I worked in a studio in New York for 6 months when I was going to business school, and there was a hand weaver there who made samples for the studio. And I was fascinated by what she was doing, but I never really pursued it at that point. My wife had taken a couple courses in college in a weaving, so she was a little more experienced than I was.
I think that, the weavers are probably aware of how much attention there is on the knitting side of the business, but knitters might not even be aware that there's this whole history and importance of Harrisville in that world. When did knitting get to be more of a important line?
Well, Jared Flood came to us and was interested in making a yarn, and we made the Brooklyn tweed yarns, and he particularly wanted a carded yarn, a woolen yarn. And Nick was young. Our son Nick, who's running the business now, was a little younger than Jared, not much, and got interested in knitting through Jared, and found he was quite a good knitter, and he really liked it, and they've communicated a lot, and that sort of got us thinking more and more seriously about the knitting business. Before, we used to think, well, if you want to knit with our yarn, go ahead. We're not going to do a lot of promotion and sample requirement, pattern development.
But I think that the enthusiasm for, what people call woolly wool, woolen, it makes sense, I suppose, that it's a woolen process, but something where you can really feel more of the character of it and less of it becomes less about hand dyeing or just softness and smoothness.
Right, and I think that was certainly what attracted Jared to that idea, and he really promoted it and was very successful with it.
Yeah. So you were talking about how you need to have light wool in order to dye bright colors. But then somewhere along the line, the nightshades came along.
Yeah, that was Nick's development on his own. He got really interested in subtle colors, and he came up with this idea of making 12 basically black yarns, that each one slightly different. I said to him, how about 3? Thinking no one's going to buy shades of black, but it really turned out well, and that was specifically for knitting. It was he designed it as a knitting yarn. Some people might weave with it, but most of the people knit with it. And then he came up with daylights from that, and they're both very subtle and interesting, I think.
So do you use the same equipment for all of your yarns? So the ones that are higher twist and lower twist and thinner and thicker, are you using all the same equipment for those?
Yeah, we just have to adjust the equipment.
And so the folks who are working the mill at this point are probably not the same ones who you're who your father had worked with.
I started out with many of those people because they were skilled and knew how to do it.
Sure.
But over the years, of course, they've retired and other people have come on. And it's a big struggle because people aren't born knowing how to make yarn, either how to spin by hand or how to spin by machine. Mm-hmm. And you have to be competitive in a tight labor market in New England, and you have to pay people a living wage and get them interested in physical work because it is physical. The machines make the yarn. The people tend the machines. And it's great because men and women can do it. And that's one of the reasons it works so well as an immigrant industry, because men and women work in it. But the machines are very flexible. We could make 100% acrylic yarn too, 100% nylon. I mean, they're all made for the same machines. But many of the machines we are operating are 100 years old now. It's a little embarrassing. We're carding yarn on machines my grandfather used. But they still work.
That's the thing. You buy a new coffee machine and it does not last as long as the old one. Or, my grandmother's Singer featherweight from 1945 will never give out. But sewing machines that you buy at the discount store today might not last quite as long.
Yeah. Well, one time a fellow called me and asked me what kind of cards we were running. And I told him, and he said, well, what do they produce? About 50 pounds an hour. And I said, well, if the sun's out and the wind's blowing just right, yeah. He said, I can sell you a card made in Italy, brand new, that will double your production to 100 pounds an hour. Mm-hmm. I said, wow, that sounds great. What's it cost? $4 million. Oh
my gosh.
And what we have are worthless. Mm-hmm. And you can't replace them for $4 million.
Right.
Because you would never catch up.
Well,
that's what the world is different. That's why textile equipment isn't made in this country anymore. Mm-hmm. It doesn't make any sense.
And I've heard that there's often kind of a network of people who are all working on vintage equipment. And do you have one of these, or can you help me find this part there? Or
yeah, we do work together some on that.
Yeah.
Well, up until about 1990, there were still mills in New England, and there were spare parts around, and people were trained, and they knew what they were doing. When I started Harrisville Designs, there were 10 woolen mills within 10 miles of here.
Really? Wow.
And now there aren't any. So we have to train people from the ground up and hope they stay, because there's an investment in training. You hope they stay with it.
Yeah. Well, and we're certainly invested in the idea that people are more interested in the roots of where their things came from. But I would hope that knowing that you can get Harrisville yarns that are made in Harrisville, and the people whose families have been making this for generations is still part of it.
Yeah, it's a long, long line. It's amazing.
So with a year or a semester of business school and a family background, you've had to be, a manager and figure out a little bit about the mechanics and know something about marketing and color. What kind of adventure has this been?
It's been fantastic, actually. That was the big surprise to me, because in business school, they were teaching us how to jump on the corporate ladder and do something that would be pretty straightforward and limited,
right?
And uncreative. And when I started my own business, I found out small business is very creative. You got to do it all. You have to know about insurance. You got to know about marketing. You got to know about production. You got to know about labor, human resources,
right,
dyeing, everything. And it was really stimulating, way more exciting than I thought it would be.
So the one thing I haven't asked you about is maybe what some people will know Harrisville best for without even realizing it, which is the potholder looms. Tell me about the potholder looms.
Yeah, it's an interesting story. We all grew up making potholders, and we always kind of, once you really learn to weave on a loom or something, you look down your nose at that kind of weaving. But when we developed after 1985, when the weaving industry really started to slow down, many women went back to work after 1985 for macro reasons I won't get into because they're political, but the weaving, weaving, sewing, all that kind of homework, really started to dry up. So we took a look at where we thought in the first 15 years of the business we hadn't really done a good job. And one of the things we came up with quickly was with children. Because when a school said they wanted to teach their kids to weave, our response was, buy these floor looms and all this equipment, and if you have a teacher that knows how to weave, you can teach the kids. Well, that's a big investment for a school, and if the teacher who knows how to weave all of a sudden takes a leave of absence to have children, of our own, and no one's there that knows how to weave, then all of a sudden the school's stuck with a lot of equipment they don't know how to use. So we went back, and I talked with Nell a lot about what we could do, and we came up with making a frame loom, which was so simple everybody could understand it. It's like tapestry loom, but it's basically like a big potholder loom. And that got us into the educational toy business. Educational toys are sold to toy stores through reps. The reps represent manufacturers and go to the stores and help them display or choose whatever they're doing, the toys they're going to sell. And all really good educational stores have some crafts, and weaving is part of it. And we used to have the reps come here to learn about our products because they're not intuitive necessarily. And one of those meetings we had, a rep and her assistant said, "You ought to think about making a potholder loom." And we said, "Oh, no, it's not really us." And she said, "What's available is really junky. It's plastic and nylon loops. The potholder comes out 3x4 or 4x4 instead of as it should. And there's a place for a quality thing." So we got into it by buying, loops that were available and looms that were available, and they were very poor quality, and we couldn't stand it. We were getting, basically the loops were poor quality because there's so many synthetics that they shrunk down and was unsatisfying. And people would say, "I got this for my grandchild, and it wasn't the way I remembered it." And so I basically said to everybody at Harrisville Designs at the time, "We've either got to fix this problem or get out of this business because we can't stand these kind of complaints. We're a company that prides itself on making the right things. And if we're going to make some junk and people are going to complain about it all the time, it's no fun." So we developed our own loom, which we make right here in Keene. And we found out that the loops are a derivative of the sock industry. And the reason the loops were lousy quality today as opposed to 30 years ago was because the sock industry was collapsing. So long story short, we ended up making our own loops. So we changed from a waste product to a manufactured product, which changes the numbers, but every loop is made for the size loom, and we know what's in it. And we could stand by the quality of it. And that worked really well. And once we did that, it occurred to us, well, if we're going to make the loops, maybe we can make the loops bigger. Because the loops make a 6x6 potholder because that's the size socks are.
Oh, yeah.
And I talked to the fellow knitting the loops for us, and I said, "Can you make a bigger loop?" And he said, "Well, my machines are set because that's the size socks are." But he spent a year and came up with the idea of how to do it, and that's how the Pro Loops came about. And the Pro Loops basically go on a 10-inch loom as opposed to a 7-inch loom, and you can make a much bigger potholder.
So are most of your materials, are you using pretty much all natural materials?
100% cotton on the loops, yep. And wool.
And wool. Wow.
The loops themselves have a tiny little thread of mylar or some kind of synthetic to catch the loops to start each one.
Right.
But it's insignificant in weight, and you can't see it.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not a machine knitter, so I can't help you there.
Yeah. Wow.
But it's a good example of going into a broken down, poor quality product and trying to make it a much better one. And people have responded to it. A bag of loops that we sell for $20 and did then, everybody else was selling for $4. And people in the toy industry said, "You'll never be able to do it." And we said, "Well, either we do it or we're not going to do it because we're not going to make the $4 loops that nobody wants." And people can recognize, not everybody, but many people recognize the difference in quality. And if you're going to work with your hands, you better use good quality products. Otherwise, the things you make are going to be terrible.
Yes. Well, and the colors are really great, too. And I think that if you're doing it just as a byproduct, can you get the great colors?
Yeah, you have to work at it. And we're constantly working on it. We have a project going right now of using a little different cotton yarn and getting a little bit better quality of color.
Yeah. But they're so much fun. I mean, I've been to, I was in a yarn store with somebody who, has won awards for her weaving, but she picked up a potholder loom and later that afternoon she said, "See what I made."
I know, it's incredible.
Yeah.
And now people have published books about things you can do. It's really exciting.
Yeah. Linda Ligon, my business partner, has kind of rediscovered them, and
we all did, really.
Yeah. you can do patterns, you can do texture. I
Right.
mean, I did it when it was just the over-under, and
Yeah.
my dad would have to finish off the edges for me.
And it's still good for kids, too. Take a lot of pride in what they can do.
Yeah, yeah.
So we've really enjoyed doing that.
So you've been doing this for how long now? 40?
Over 50 years. I started in 1971.
Wow. So you've been doing it almost as long as the age your dad was when he
Yeah.
was done with the business.
Yeah, I realized at one point that I'd been at Harrisville Designs longer than he was at his family business.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but it's been fun. It's gone quickly.
Yeah. And
It's been a struggle. It's never been
sure.
fantastically easy.
But you mentioned that your son Nick designed yarns. Is he coming into this business now?
Yeah, he started in 2010.
Oh, wow.
And we have 3 sons. And when you build a business that's tied to a preservation project, it needs to go on. We can't sell it to someone who's going to move it. We can't close it because its idea is to be part of the preservation. So it was really important that it have a future beyond us. And we were delighted when one of our sons said he'd like to think about it and give it a try, because we didn't really raise our children in the business. And by the time they got out of college, their idea of it was it looked like a lot of work and not much money. And I thought, well, that's pretty accurate, actually. So he was brave because, he worked in Boston for a while, and then he decided he wanted to try it. And lucky for us, he's really taken to it, and he's very good at it. And, it seems like the business has a future. And he understands the role it plays in the preservation project. And it's been a really good transition for us because he's an internet person. And my wife and I really, my wife a little bit, but me, not at all. So he's really been great at figuring out how do we sell on the internet. And the nice thing about the internet is we can be in a little remote place like Harrisville and sell to the whole world.
But there is kind of a trick to marketing something that is so hands-on and also being remote. So there is that is a...
I didn't think it could be done, but he's doing a really good job at doing it. He has a good sense of how to do it. And he's got people working around him who are really good at it too.
Yeah.
So I'd say if that's the future, then we're there, which is good because it wasn't for me.
I think that it's good if somebody's going to come into the business, whether they're coming in from your family or outside. I don't know how many people want to commit themselves to only doing the thing that they're walking into, and how many of them want to say, I want to take on a new challenge. I think I can see where this would go.
Yeah. Well, all new employees, we give them an overview of the business, what role the business is playing in the community, and what its history is a little bit. And people take to it, which is good.
So a couple of years ago, Harrisville sort of joined forces with another New England project, which is Peace Fleece.
Yeah, we made the yarn for Peace Fleece from the beginning when Pete and Mary Haggerty, Marty Haggerty, were bringing in. They were sheep farmers in Maine, and they wanted to do something to help what they thought of as world peace. And Pete spoke Russian, so he decided he would go to Russia, find some wool, bring it over here, mix it with the Maine wool, and make Peace Fleece. So he did, and that was their business. And it was basically a country-style knitting yarn. And we did that for a long time. And when they decided to retire, their children weren't interested in taking it over. And they asked us if they sold the business to someone, would we make the yarn for them? Because it's very hard to find somebody to make yarn now. And I said, well, depends on who you sell it to, because we want it to be successful. And they came up with a few ideas which I didn't think were viable. And finally, Nick said to me, why don't we make the yarn already? Why don't we buy the company from them and make it part of Harrisville Designs? And that's what we ultimately did. And we're really glad. It's a very different kind of yarn, and it does its own thing. And by that time, they had moved from Russian Maine wool to Navajo Maine wool, but the same idea. And it's been great. We like doing it.
When you say it's different from the Harrisville Designs yarn, how is it different?
It was made a little differently. It's a little softer yarn. It not as strong. Wasn't designed to hold up for a warp for weaving, for instance. But that's basically it. And a little different kind of wool.
And this is the Navajo fine wool, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a Rambouillet wool.
Yeah.
And it's mixed with some mohair,
Oh.
which we actually buy the mohair from South Africa. Almost all the good mohair in Texas is gone, and that's South Africa now makes the best mohair. But there's not a whole lot of mohair in it, but some.
Probably gives it a bit of luster and
Yep, that was the idea that they had. And we haven't changed it.
yeah. And I think that started just a couple years ago. So that's great to be working on supporting some folks who are still producing wool in the U.S.
Yeah. And Nick goes out there to the Navajo reservation each year and talks to the people raising the wool and how they can do it better. And, we have to be sure we're paying them a reasonable price for the wool to make it worth their effort to keep it clean and do things that we need. So far, so good.
What an adventure.
Yeah.
When I was stepping into the retail store, which we're on the floor above right now, one of the things I saw coming in the door was a sign for sheer. Can you tell me about sheer?
Sheer was another one of those products that Nick created from the ground up. He got interested in breed-specific, farm-specific yarns. And so he would go and visit a farm and talk with the people raising the sheep about those kind of sheep, and then he would buy their clip and get it scoured and then make sort of one-of-a-kind yarns from that flock. And he wants to continue doing that. And it was fun for us last year because the last year he did was from a farm right here in Harrisville. And the yarn turned out really well.
Yeah.
So there's a total Harrisville product.
Yeah.
And it sold very well. And we've got another clip from them this year. So we're going to do more of that.
That's wonderful. So it was just a local farm that had wool available?
Yeah. Yep. In fact, a farm that started just about the time I started Harrisville Designs by a friend of mine who was doing the same thing, back to the earth and see if he can make a sheep farm go.
Yeah, and because there's a place for one-of-a-kind yarn that is, I may never get this very same yarn again because even next year it'll be a different clip. But then on the other hand, having something where you think, I know that this color that I got 5 years ago will also be available, so it's good to have both of those.
Yeah. And he's done natural colors with those. There's never enough of it to dye.
Right.
So that's fine.
Yeah. So you have the colors on the shelves that have a really consistent input and are a consistent product, and then also are able to be flexible and have a little bit of
brought some flexibility into us.
Yeah.
Because when I started the business in 1970, one of the sources of yarn was mill ends. And mill ends were very, very inexpensive, and it was terrifying to think, how are you going to compete with them? Because mill ends are leftovers from somebody who already bought the yarn. So if someone who needed fabric bought 300,000 yards of fabric, you'd make X 100,000 pounds of yarn, and some of it's left over. And the guy who took the 300,000 yards of cloth paid for the yarn. So you're sitting on leftover yarn could be 10 or 15,000 pounds that's already paid for. So whatever you sell it for is gravy. And the mills own that, which is why it's called a mill end. And they would sell it for a fraction of what it costs, even in the materials that were in it. But it was here today, gone tomorrow. And so we wanted to make a consistent product that you could buy the same yarn from us now that you bought 10 years ago. And many professional weavers needed that kind of consistency. So we've always prided ourselves on doing that. And occasionally over our history, we've changed our color line and people really don't like it. But you have to update. In fact, we may do it again one day. I don't know.
So you mentioned that the educational distributors would come through. How did you sell your yarns at first? Did you have to have yarn reps? Did you have to build up a network for that?
There weren't reps in that, but we sold directly to, we sold mail order first, and we didn't even think about wholesaling. And then one day, about 1978 or so, we decided, okay, you can't leave the stores out there. They need a good product. And so we basically changed our pricing structure and then sold through stores. And we sold more yarn that way than we did the other by direct.
Yeah.
And we still sell quite a bit of yarn through stores who resell it and represent us.
Yeah, that kind of collaboration that keeps the industry going.
A struggle for all of us, though. That's the problem.
It is, but when it works, it means a lot.
It's great fun.
Yeah.
People like weaving, I think. We still run our classes, very small part of the business, but it brings weavers to us and also brings teachers to us. And the teachers get to use our materials, yarns and looms, sometimes for the first time. And they realize what they are, and they become little ambassadors for us as they head out and teach in other places. But we really like the classes. They're fun.
One thing I wanted to ask you about is that you folks did sort of a major overhaul on one of your looms recently, right?
No, we haven't really changed it, but we developed a new loom called the Model L.
Oh, okay.
L for 50. Our 50th anniversary
there you go.
loom. Yeah. And it's a bigger, heavier floor loom.
Okay.
Something between the rug loom and the small portable looms.
Great. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Yeah.
But we always thought of Harrisville Designs as a yarn business. The looms are fine. It's a good product. We like making them. But other people can make them. But not everybody can make yarn. It's very difficult to do it.
Yeah.
And, we still like to think that yarn is the heart of the business.
Well, thank you so much for letting me enjoy your space and
That's all right.
Spending your time this afternoon.
Great. Happy to do it.
Thanks to our sponsors for supporting the podcast. Thank you for listening to the Long Thread Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please rate the show and leave us a comment on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform. Thanks again.